I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, June 7th, and I'm going to be talking about the topic of pace from Mirror of Intimacy, Daily Reflections on Emotional and Erotic Intelligence. If you have any questions about sex, love, or intimacy, you can contact our intake coordinators at 310-843-9902, and they are standing by to help you out. So I love the quote from today from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's one of my favorite writers and thinkers. He was part of the New Thought movement at the turn of the last century. And he says, adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience. And I just love that thinking that the patience of nature, the pace of nature rather, is patience. And all we have to do right now is look around and see how spring is in full bloom right now. And that nature waits, whatever it is, 12 months every year, but for spring, probably about 8 months in order to come to full bloom. And nature's way is to unfold, to emerge, to not force or push. And we wait and we see the fruition of that if we just look around our environment right now. I would say pretty much in wherever you're living, at least in this hemisphere. So here in California, we see an explosion of jacaranda trees. So the city skyline is purple, and there are lavender flowers all over the ground and the cars. And it's a very special time here. So I hope that you think about nature's pace as we talk about pace today. And now that we're emerging from the pandemic, how do you pace yourself day to day? Have you noticed a difference in your rhythms since this emergence? Since we all started getting vaccinated really in, late January, early February here, and have you noticed the ramping up? And I think in Los Angeles, it's easy to notice the ramping up because we gauge everything by way of traffic. And so there were days during the pandemic where it would take no time to get anywhere because there was no one on the streets, no cars, very few pedestrians. And now the traffic has ramped up again. And so I'm noticing my pace in the traffic. Can I drive at a slower pace? Do I have to rush? And it's one thing to hurry, to move things along, to get things done, but rushing has a very different energy or pace to it, if you will. So, how are you pacing yourself day to day? And are you bringing some of the lessons of the pandemic into your day to day? So, for example, one of the things I noticed during the pandemic was how much I would busy myself by going places. Like I might be at home and think, oh, I should go to the dry cleaner and pick something up, or maybe I'll run to the store. And all of that is a distraction, I think, of creating something to do in the midst of already having plenty to do. It also creates a carbon footprint that's unnecessary. It creates, more traffic that's unnecessary, noise. That was the other thing I noticed during the pandemic was just how quiet the city was and how loud the birds are and how active the squirrels were in the trees in my backyard. So look at the decisions that you made maybe during the pandemic about how you wanted to live your life going forward. And how it was different pre and post pandemic. What are the things that you are wanting to hold on to from that very quiet, restful year that we had, a year that's been unprecedented for all of us. It was like a long, long weekend that would never end. And how are you weaving that into the pace of your life now? And, for some, this might be a luxury to be able to change and to adapt to a slower pace. For others, it becomes a choice. I mean, I've heard many, many people say they don't want to go back to that kind of intense strain of working or jobs they were working that they didn't like. It gave us all an enormous amount of time to reflect. And I'm asking you to think about how you're re-entering the world, because here in LA, the sanctions for masking and social distancing are ending on June 15th. And does that mean everybody's just going to race out into the world in ways that are not intentional, not thoughtful? Or are you going to be careful about how you re-enter the world, about what you do, who you see, how many people you surround yourself with, and really being more mindful of this quiet space that we've all been in? So it looks like there's a question here. Um, Sharon writes, my husband and I are in our 70s, and patience is a problem for me. He's in recovery, but progress isn't fast enough for me. My life is running out, and a hope of a normal, fulfilling marriage is running out. How would you address this? Boy, this is one of my favorite topics right now. This is a topic that I'm grappling with myself, and it has nothing to do with recovery or not recovery. It has to do with what happens in long-term relationships, and maybe not even that long term, when we get into a relationship with someone that we're crazy about and we're in love with, and we think they're the right partner. And then, months into the marriage or relationship, we all think we're in relationship with the wrong person. But the truth is, we're all in relationship with the right person. We're just there to work out our issues. But what I've seen over time in my own relationship is just how different my partner and I actually are. There's a whole bunch we have in common, and I think that's crucial for relationships working, that what we value is superior and more important to how much we love someone. But do we have the same value system? And then at that point, to be able to look at our partners and say, you know what, I'm not joined at the hip with this person. Um, he may like to do things that I don't like to do, or I don't have the stamina for. And there are things I want to do that he would just find uninteresting or boring or not stimulating enough. I guess that's the same as boring. And so, how do we both proceed with our lives independently of each other and together with each other? And I think this starts to break the ideas of traditional relationships and what couples are supposed to do together. Like, we're supposed to do everything together, take all our vacations together. And so, for example, I have this deep desire to go on a walking tour in certain places of Europe next summer, which he may or may not be interested in. And I want to go for a month. He may be more interested in doing something active somewhere else in the world. And if we both went on separate vacations, and we just had a great time, and we could share our exuberance and our renewed sense of ourselves with each other upon our return, then to me, that feels like an exciting relationship. And I'm like you, thinking that there are no more some days. The some days are here, and especially at 70, if you're 70 years old and you're able-bodied, then I would encourage you to get on with your life, to do the things that light you up, that turn you on, that are fun for you. Obviously, if some of that has to do with being with another partner, then that's another conversation about how you're going to manage that. And that's where people start to talk about consensual non-monogamy or designing their relationships in alternative ways. But that's too big of a topic for this webinar. But I would encourage you to pace yourself, to be true to what is true for you at this age, whoever you are, and to live your life independently and with your partner. So, how do you pace decisions that you have to make, going back to your life, like the question we just had? And are you impulsive? And do you attack the problem without thinking? Or are you intentional about, what is the next year going to look like for me now as we're emerging from this pandemic? How am I going to talk to my partner about how we're going to live together, but do things separately and pace ourselves differently? So, are you really impulsive, or are you deliberate and discerning when you are faced with these various choices? And it's true, as we age, the choices get more narrow. We have to be more discerning about what we want, and where we want to go, because there is the very real peril of the body starting to shift and change. When you're 20 years old or 25 or 30 years old, you don't really have to worry about these things that much. But as we age, we do have to have a lot of discrimination about where we're going and what we want to do. And I think we should be apologetic for those choices, unapologetic for what we need to do and what we want to do and where we need to go. And what speeds you up and what slows you down, and which feels better to you? having had the experience of not just being slowed down, but completely dialed down, like stopped, versus running at breakneck speed, where is the middle ground for you? Because stress is the thing that creates anxiety for people. It literally makes us sick. We have problems eating, sleeping. We're wound up all the time. And so, what is the pace that you want to run your life at? And that is more important than anything, because your relationship with yourself is the absolute most important relationship there is. And without a true relationship with yourself, about what do I like? What do I need? How much water do I need to drink in a day? What kind of food is good for my body? I was thinking about that this morning when I was making breakfast for my family. And feeding everybody more or less what I like, which may not be right for them. I was thinking particularly about eating right for your blood type and how we all have different blood types. I'm a type O, so type O's really need a lot of protein. But that doesn't mean other types too. So you might have a family where somebody is plant-based and someone else is a carnivore. And we have to take our differences into account instead of trying to get everybody to be the same. And I think that's where families really struggle and don't do well and can be dysfunctional in some regards, because everybody's physiology is expected to line up and we're all expected to move at the pace of the parental figures. So I want to encourage you to really be true to yourself and the pace you want to live your life and how you want to make your decisions for your life. Now, when we look at relationships, like the question this gentleman just had about a 5-year hiatus, think about the pace of all the relationships you've started. And did they start fast or slow? Were you off to the races and just sort of winded by how quickly it was going? Or was it slow and steady and deliberate? If they started out quickly, what do you remember about why that happened? And then how did the relationship go? And what were the issues in the relationship when it started out quickly? And if slowly, how was it different from the quick one? And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying that they're qualitatively different. And oftentimes in youth, we move rapidly. And not just in youth, at any time of life, because we meet somebody, it's highly novel, we're highly excited, we want to learn everything we possibly can about them, we have nonstop dates and conversations, and that's all part of the getting to know you process. But I always point to this problem of the relationship having to catch up with these high dopamine and high novelty, high feelings of love, and really slowing down to get to know each other, because you're wanting to get to know yourself through this person, and you will miss the red flags if you're moving too rapidly. And then if you started a relationship rapidly and you started one slowly, which one of those relationships lasted the longest? Which is better for your pace? Oftentimes, I suggest that people slow down, especially if they're recovering from addiction, because recovery from addiction is about being present and not being dissociated. And it can be incredibly uncomfortable for people to move that slowly, but they learn so much about themselves. And it doesn't mean that the relationships end up working out. It just means that they're paying attention along the way, which may be why they don't work out, and they don't work out quicker. So they might break up at 3 months instead of wasting 3 years of one's life. So just be aware of that. Sometimes relationships can start quickly and be super fun and can last. They can go the distance. So no judgment here, just awareness. There's a well-known neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio, who talks about the slow and accurate route versus the quick and dirty route. And the slow and accurate route is when we have time to think, when our prefrontal cortex is operational. So it's a slow operating system. We have time to think, time to evaluate, time to discern, turn things over, and then we make a decision. Versus the quick and dirty route is when it hits the subcortical part of our brains, that part of the brain that's producing this particular type of dopamine. And so it's a very quick and dirty route because we make instantaneous decisions, sometimes not in our best interest. And there was a study that was done, I don't know where it was done, if it was just in Southern California, but I heard it on NPR years ago, where they studied air traffic controllers. And what they saw was that the younger men, and these were specifically men, because I think it's a pretty male dominated category, the younger men were quicker, very, very quick. The older men were slower, but they were more accurate. So those of you that are older, don't despair. You may be making more accurate, discerning decisions, which is useful when you feel like time is closing in on you. So love addicts will jet forward into relationships without really knowing who the other person is, let alone themselves. So if you have love addicted tendencies, be mindful of that. See if you can slow your pace. Make sure you're talking to other people, checking things out, and take time for the relationship to catch up, because sex is a very, very powerful aphrodisiac. Sex in and of itself is an aphrodisiac, and the neurochemical effect that sex has on us really speeds things up. So I'm going to look at some questions here. Ron says, I recently started to experiment with what I hope is healthy masturbation. As a recovering porn addict, I don't think I ever I don't think I ever had a great relationship with my own body and sexuality. I'm currently single and want to develop my own healthy sexuality before I enter into a relationship with someone. Do you have any tips for me? I just ordered your book, Sexual Reflections, and hope that helps as well. Well, I think that workbook will help you enormously, because it does a deep dive into these questions of who am I sexually? You know, we forget that sex is a beautiful bodily based experience that's all about pleasure. And it's even pleasurable if you're trying to conceive a child. Obviously, you know, sex is how human beings procreate. But beyond just the utilitarian function of procreation, it is deeply pleasurable. And when we've had to struggle with abuse and using sex as a way to regulate ourselves, in other words, manage our moods, lower our anxiety, we don't get to use it for what it was made for. And sex, in its very highest experience, is about a deep connection with another human being and with ourselves, and ultimately with what I would call the divine. So, taking time to understand what the pace is like for you when you masturbate, you know, whether you like it slow or fast, or, you know, a tight grip or a light grip, or whatever the case may be, is about you getting to know what's really pleasurable for you. If you're invoking, you know, pornographic images or straining or forcing orgasm, then you're not really in tune with the natural tendencies of your body. And if you're also have an agenda about orgasm and not just about pleasure and feeling the sensation of your body and touch, then you are probably stressing out too much about this as well. So, anything you can do to ask yourself, what turns me on? What really turns me on? What do I like? Even though it may feel like it's aberrant or someone else would judge it as weird, I think you have to be disinterested in that and just write about what's true for you. And then you can go back and pick through it, which is what Sexual Reflections helps you do, to determine what is maybe, you know, historical or vestigial from your abuse or your addiction, and what of it is really true to yourself. And after that, you know, you really don't know unless you have the experience. So people in recovery from sex and love addiction need to date in a healthy way. They need to have healthy sexual experiences with other people, so you can figure out what you like and don't like. It's very hard to do that in a vacuum. So, where sex is concerned in your sex life, ponder the quality of your sexual experiences and what natural pace feels good for you, from the gentle blossoming of a flower to the sweeping excitement of a lightning storm. Nature shows us all sorts of different paces and iterations of expression. So, what is the natural pace for you? And make sure you're not trying to replicate what you see in pornography, because that isn't what all bodies want or all bodies need. And are you turned on by a sense of caring when it's slow, or athleticism when it's fast, or is it a combination of both? I think people in recovery, especially, can get really hung up on this notion of sex always having to be, quote, loving and kind. And the truth is, if you don't have a loving, kind relationship, if you don't trust your partner, if you don't feel safe in their presence, then you're not likely going to be willing to engage in more novel behaviors. So they absolutely go together. And these things are always paradoxical. But in order to try something unique and novel and different, you have to feel safe and loved and loving in the relationship. So it's a combination of both, and you should try both to see how they make you feel. And verbal communication about how the pace of sex actually feels can be a sexy addition to your lovemaking. So you can direct your partner to go faster, slower, harder. We all know the language of sex. So don't be shy. Start to be verbal in your communication sexually. We know that verbal conversations during sex are incredibly arousing because they arouse the right brain in the body. And that's why people do it. So if you're holding your breath during sex, if you're not making any sounds, think about what has you repressing your true nature, your true expression of your sexuality, and talk to your partner about your shame, because that's what would be obstructing you, and see if you can try things in a more vocal, fun way. And we know that typically men travel more quickly from arousal to orgasm than women do, but this rate fluctuates depending on energy, mood, and other influences of each individual. A slower pace might calm somebody's anxiety down and allow for a deeper, sensual, more emotional connection. So, slowing down during sex keeps the entire body stimulated. Um, and rather than fostering sort of the excited frenzy that happens when we've got this massive dopamine surge, and that excited frenzy is often what we see in, films and television when people come to the front door and they strip off each other's clothes really quickly. I mean, that's great if you just met somebody, probably, or you've been seeing somebody for a short period of time. But as you're connecting more deeply, these slower paced connections allow you to have a different experience of yourself and of your body. It also prolongs orgasm. So, of course, there's breathing involved in that, and much more sensuality. And if you're alternating between these slower paces, these more rapid paced experiences will naturally happen spontaneously also. So watch yourself when you're having thoughts that it's taking too long, or that it's going so fast. So when people are nervous, they tend to speak and move faster. So that could be a sign of confidence and mastery, to take one's time, to really slow down. We see this a lot in males who come to treatment here at Center for Healthy Sex, especially younger males in their 20s and early 30s, where they're just run by this anxiety that they have to hurry up and get it done, or that women really want it fast and furious. And it's all about tracking the other person as opposed to being true to themselves. And many, many men need to feel connected relationally before they can have sex. It's not the way that it gets advertised in the media. So, again, be true to who you are, and bring that into your relationships and into your sexuality. So let's see if there are questions here. 34-year-old single man looking to attract a healthy romantic relationship. When I go on dates, when I really like someone, I get anxious and want to be certain if she wants to go on another date or not. What can I do? Is it connected to childhood wounds? Thanks in advance. Well, since I don't know your childhood wounds, I can't answer that question. But what I can tell you is that it's important for you to make sure you have both feet on the floor and that you're breathing, that you're taking deep breaths, and to read the cues of the other person. Does it feel like she's having a good time? Are you having a good time? Are you enjoying your conversation? Do you have things in common? Is there something to talk about between the two of you? Because your anxiety will get in the way of you just being yourself. So, crack the kind of jokes that you crack, and whether she likes your humor or not is not none of your business. Whether she likes you or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you like her. And if you like her, you should ask her to go out again. And if she doesn't want to, then you go on to the next person. And I know that sounds really simple, and I know it's not easy, but we get far too hung up on what the other person is thinking of us. And if you're less interested in that and more interested in lowering your anxiety, breathing, being yourself, and knowing that you are a good person, that you have something to bring to another person, that you want to have a relationship or build a family with someone, then you're bringing a lot. So start to trust yourself more, and stop tracking the other person so intently. If you tracked yourself as much as you did her, you would be much more confident, and much more yourself. And, they would either like you or they wouldn't. So sex can be treated as a solitary act. It can be compartmentalized. Um, and it starts, at the minute we get naked and the minute orgasm happens. And I think we should consider that it's not a solitary act. It's solitary when you're masturbating, but not when you're in relationship with someone else. So this is like learning a dance or a skill. It's all about you, and it's not all about you at the same time. And that's the paradox. It's about you knowing who you are, what you like, being willing to communicate it, talking about it out loud, and then also noticing your partner's body and the smell of their hair, the sound of their voice, the way they feel on top of you, beneath you, and tracking also their responsiveness, like what feels good to them, what doesn't. So it's both and. You've got to be watching yourself and watching the other. And I think what happens is too many people um, just focus on their partner because they're so worried about what their partner thinks, which really ties to shame, by the way, that they forget to pay attention to what they think and what they need. So be mindful of that. It's that sexual energy builds and it flows all day, every day in life. It's not just it starts when you get naked and it's over when you orgasm. It's part of our day-to-day living with each other. And just as affection is built during the week, we can pace ourselves with our relationships too. And this is one of the beautiful messages of Tantra, is that pleasure is in every moment. Pleasure is in the tea that you sip, the laughter you have with a colleague at work, the noticing of the beautiful day. That pleasure is awash all the time if we tend to look at it. And if we share those pleasurable moments with others and with our partners, whether it's in little notes that we send them, or texts, or emojis, or little things that we say along the way, that kind of affection and sweetness sort of builds the erotic charge as we go along. And so much of our habitual consciousness gets wrapped up in figuring out sex, love, and relating that we don't invite enough of not knowing or enough of the mystery into the proposition. You can only know what you know about yourself. You can't know what you don't know about yourself or the other person. So while you have to be clear about what's true for you, and clear about what your partner likes and doesn't like, because hopefully they've told you and you're not some kind of mind reader, it's also important to just relax and breathe into the situation to see what happens, what emerges uniquely between you and your partner that's distinctly different from any other partner you've been with. So someone's talking about that they were betrayed with a sex addicted husband who started using Viagra without her knowing. And she's having difficult time accepting that he takes Viagra without telling her. It feels like our sexual encounters are sped up because of the Viagra has kicked in, and it feels performative. So yes, I would suggest that you have a very detailed conversation with your partner about why he takes Viagra. When did he start taking it? Why did he take it? How does it help him? What happens when he doesn't take it? What if you tried having sex without him taking it? Um, and these are very explicit, very vulnerable conversations between two people. And you have to be able to have them without judgment, without rolling your eyes, without shaming your partner. Because men who are taking that medication can feel very ashamed. They can feel weak. They can feel like their masculinity is fading. all sorts of things. And there are many, many reasons people take Viagra. So finding out why is a good idea. And then finding out what would a love life, what would a sex life be without an erect penis? How might you go about making love without the erection? And how do you connect to each other without that? And what is the judgment about that? Why is it so important? I mean, I know that it's easy for me to ask that as a female, and all the males out there are saying, oh my God, you have no idea why it's so important, but it's important for men, and I get that. But these tender, vulnerable conversations can lead to high levels of eroticism. But when you're just guessing about why somebody's doing what they're doing or making assumptions, and you're afraid to talk about it or tell your partner because you don't want to be judged or you're ashamed, all of that is between the two of you during the sexual experience. And so the more you can have these conversations when you're, sitting across the table from each other, making eye contact, not just taking a walk when you're not looking at each other, but really feeling what it feels like to have this conversation. Because part of it, depending on his age, is about loss. And there is grief and loss in our sexuality as we age because our bodies change. They're not able to do what they once used to do. People have back pain, so they have to organize pillows in a certain way, or somebody's got some pain someplace else, or they don't get an erection, or they don't lubricate the way they used to. And all of this has to be talked about and accommodated for, and hopefully laughed about. And there may even be some tears, but those conversations are what bring a sex life alive. It's not what happens when people are 20 years old or when it's in some movie that you saw and no one's talking about their shame. And that's the thing that makes sexuality tank, essentially. So I think this is similar. Someone who has a partner who can't perform due to health issues. We have talks about the issues, but there's no results. I miss sex. I'm ready to propose an open relationship, but I'm ashamed to ask because of my religion. How do I bring this conversation up? Is it okay to propose to him? Well, I would say if nothing has changed between the two of you, if neither one of you are making an effort to find ways to be sexual in the midst of this health issue, then and that means you've exhausted these conversations, really, because just because somebody doesn't have a penis doesn't mean you don't have fingers and a tongue and other parts that people use to have sex with, not to mention the vast array of sex toys that are out there. But if the two of you aren't connecting in that way, then I think you have to get straight with yourself first about how and why this ties to your religion. And does your God love you any less if you have an agreement with your partner about having sex with other people? And I think the problem that I hear from couples all the time who've been cheated on, both men and women, is the lying. It's the lying that's painful, the betrayal that's painful. It's not the sex itself with another person, sometimes, not always. So to have an earnest conversation with your partner to say, this isn't working for me. I love you. I don't want to leave the relationship. I don't want to leave our family, but I do want to be able to have sex with other people. Can we talk about how to do that? Is the beginning of an erotic conversation. And um, sometimes that conversation can lead to having sex. So there are a couple of books you might want to look at. Tammy Nelson's book called The New Monogamy, which has a lot of information in that book about consensual non-monogamy with contracts and agreements and rules and regulations. Is a very useful book to look at. The other one is called Designer Relationships, where you design the kind of relationship that you want together, not unilaterally, but you and your partner together decide how you want to make this work. And oftentimes when there is chronic illness in a relationship, that's when these open relationships work best. And there can be a lot of beautiful sexuality that comes out of that, because the person who's going out into the world having sex can often explain to their partner, tell their partner about their sexual experiences, and that in and of itself can be arousing to the two. So be careful about your judgments about what is okay sexually and what isn't. This is the thing about sex and sexuality. It's not a prescription. It's not a one size fits all situation, just like food. Just because I love something and I think it's the best thing in the world doesn't mean that you don't think it's the most disgusting thing you've ever tasted. And sex is the same way. So, this is where I think we're evolving and shifting our sexual mores, and thinking about, as long as we're not hurting someone, as long as we are engaging in consensual sex, and that means no sex with minors or animals or anyone who cannot consent, and we want to try something and it's right for us and our partners, then there's no judgment and no shame. But whenever there's shame on board and judgment, that's when we start to get into trouble. That's when people start to lie and do things in sneaky ways and do things behind their partner's backs. And none of that is okay. So ask yourself the question of what emotions you experience after you walk away from a moment with a lover. How does it feel to hold and sleep on any relational concerns? And what are your thoughts when you wake up in the morning? So, what does it feel like when you walk away from your lover? What's it like to sleep on your concerns and not blurt them out and see what you feel like in the morning about them? Because great relationships and great sex aren't always for or created by facing everything, full on in the moment. Sometimes it takes us time to figure out who we are in relationship with other person. That's why I advocate going slowly, getting to know the other person, noticing what you're feeling. These people meet sometimes and they're like, go on marathon dates. Or they're gone for 3 days and they forgot that they didn't feed their cat for 3 days. None of that is good for anybody, especially the cat. So slow it down and think about, even the sideways glances that build a healthy relationship, or the nourishing afterglow after we've had hot sex. Let yourself savor the moment, and not be so quick to lunge at the sex and the sexuality all the time, because there's so much more to sex than just that experience. So today, as we say goodbye, as we end this webinar, I want you to think about checking in with your partner about the pace of your lovemaking and asking intimate questions and share your experiences, the way you both love to have sex. And let your communication be sexy and demonstrate this while you're discussing sex, and sexual play. And sometimes, humor is a form of sexual play. And we may choose to connect not just for personal pleasure, but to have consequences that reverberate through our whole bodies and our capacity for sexual love. I mean, when we have sex and we make love, there's an energy that reverberates in our bodies. And so remember that that's part of why we have sex. So, what kind of pace are we moving at if we're sharing in one of the most profound sexual and emotional experiences of our lives? What kind of pace do you want to have? What kind of energy do you want to exchange? And what kind of energy do you want to bring to the world? Because sexual energy is an energy of vitality and life and lust for life. So bring your sexual energy to the world. Don't let it leak out all over the place. It's not about having sex with wide and varied people. It's about you embracing life in its totality and fullness and connecting with your partner in that way too. So I hope that June brings you a luscious, excitatory beginning to summer, and that you pace the summer slowly so it doesn't go away too quickly. And I look forward to seeing you in July.